You think you're finally free after your divorce, but what if your fresh start was actually the final scene of someone else's meticulously written script? The scent of lemon polish and stale ambition hung heavy in the air of the divorce lawyer's office. I kept running my thumb over the smooth, cool surface of the mahogany desk, a nervous habit I'd developed somewhere between irreconcilable differences and dividing the antique clock collection. 22 years, 2 decades melted away like cheap ice cubes in a lukewarm glass of scotch. And for what? To feel this hollow, almost giddy lightness? I looked across the expanse of polished wood at Sarah. She looked exactly the same, only sadder. Her familiar blonde hair pulled into a tight, unforgiving bun. Sarah and I hadn't fought in years. We just existed beside each other, like 2 distant planets in a decaying orbit. We were polite, we were functional, we were utterly, terrifyingly dead inside. My therapist called it companionate inertia. I called it the slow, agonizing death of my youth. So, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Davies, the lawyer whose tie looked aggressively expensive, cleared his throat. We have the final asset distribution agreement here. The house is yours. Mrs. Henderson keeps the lake cabin and the entirety of the retirement portfolio, given your recent career shift into, and I quote, fulfillment consulting. Fulfillment consulting. God, the irony was thick enough to spread on toast. I was finally doing what I wanted to do, writing that novel I'd shelved for 2 decades while working in corporate mergers. But I was doing it broke, newly single, and feeling like a selfish coward. Sarah finally spoke, her voice flat. He can have the house, Davies. I never liked the garden anyway. That stung more than any shouted accusation ever could have. My garden. The roses I meticulously pruned, the little stone bench I built for her anniversary. She dismissed it like a faulty appliance. Thank you, Sarah, I managed, the words catching. She didn't look at me. She looked past my shoulder, out the panoramic window overlooking the city skyline, her expression distant, almost pitying. I just want this over, Mark, she continued, folding the papers precisely along the creases. I wish you well. Truly. I hope this new life brings you everything you think you're missing. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening. I sat there, Mark Henderson, newly liberated, 48 years old, with a mortgage, a partially written novel, and a sudden stomach-churning realization that I had just burned down the only house I'd ever truly known. I leaned back in the leather chair, closing my eyes, breathing in the smell of expensive paper and freedom. Maybe this was it. Maybe the next chapter would be exciting. Maybe I'd meet someone new, someone who appreciated spontaneity, someone who didn't judge my collection of vintage sci-fi paperbacks. I needed a fresh start, a total cleansing of the slate. I picked up my briefcase feeling lighter than air and headed out onto the busy street. The sun felt hotter, the traffic noisier, the world suddenly vibrant and demanding. I walked 3 blocks before the celebratory buzz wore off, replaced by a gnawing loneliness. I needed a drink. I needed to process. I pulled out my phone to call my best friend Tom when a small silver sedan abruptly swerved from the curb, clipping the edge of the sidewalk right where I was standing. I stumbled back against a lamppost, my briefcase clattering to the ground. The driver leaned across the passenger seat, rolling down the window with surprising speed. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," the driver exclaimed, looking genuinely panicked. "I wasn't looking. Are you hurt?" I looked up, still dusting off my jacket, ready to deliver a piece of my mind about reckless driving, when I finally focused on the driver's face. It was a woman, mid-30s, dark, striking eyes, and a messy braid falling over one shoulder. She was beautiful in a way that felt immediate and utterly disarming. "No, I'm fine," I muttered, suddenly aware of how badly my heart was hammering. Just startled. She offered a weak smile, her relief evident. "Let me at least buy you a coffee to apologize properly. Please? I feel terrible." My resolve, built over months of slow, painful planning, crumbled instantly under the weight of those eyes. This was it, wasn't it? Destiny clearing the path. I nodded, a genuine smile finally breaking through my anxiety. A coffee sounds perfect. She pulled the car smoothly to the curb, motioned for me to get in, and as I reached for the passenger door handle, I noticed a small, faded sticker affixed to the bottom corner of her rear bumper. It was a tiny, stylized silhouette of a lighthouse, the exact same obscure emblem Sarah and I had picked out during our disastrous honeymoon cruise 15 years ago. A symbol so unique, we thought no one else in the world even knew it existed. My hand froze inches from the cool metal of the door handle. The giddy lightness evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that felt far heavier than the anchor of my marriage had ever been. I blinked, leaning closer to the window, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence, a mass-produced sticker designed to look artisanal. "Is everything all right?" the woman asked, her brow furrowing slightly. She had a melodious voice, warm and slightly husky, the kind of voice that made you want to lean in and listen forever, which, ironically, was precisely what I'd stopped doing with Sarah. "Yeah, fine," I forced out, stepping back from the car. "Just that sticker. It's unusual." She glanced over her shoulder, following my gaze to the bumper. A flicker of something, recognition, confusion, crossed her face before she quickly masked it. "Oh, that? It's just a souvenir from an old trip, a tiny seaside town in Maine. Ever been?" "Maine?" I repeated, my voice sounding reedy. "No, never." "Well, it's lovely," she said brightly, though her eyes darted quickly towards the rearview mirror, avoiding sustained contact. "Look, about that coffee, I really want to make up for nearly taking you out." My rational brain, the one that spent 2 decades analyzing quarterly reports, screamed at me to walk away. This was too coincidental. This was the universe clearing the path, yes, but perhaps it was clearing a path straight into a cleverly set trap. But the other part of me, the newly divorced, starved for novelty part, was already opening the door. "Okay," I said, sliding into the passenger seat. The interior of the car smelled faintly of jasmine and something earthy, like old books. "Mark, my name is Mark Henderson." "Nice to meet you, Mark," she replied, shifting the car into drive smoothly. "I'm Alara." We drove in silence for a moment, the city noise fading as she navigated us toward a small independent coffee shop tucked away on a side street, far from the corporate towers downtown. I kept sneaking glances at Alara. She was effortlessly attractive, wearing a simple cream linen top that seemed perfectly suited to her relaxed demeanor. She seemed completely normal, yet the lighthouse sticker felt like a tripwire. "So," she started, pulling into a tight parking spot with practiced ease. "Fulfillment consultant? That sounds wonderfully vague. What exactly does that entail?" I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised me. "It entails me finally writing the science fiction novel I've been plotting since college, while hoping I don't have to sell my kidneys to pay the heating bill." "I love sci-fi," Alara said immediately, turning off the engine. "What's the premise?" For the next 30 minutes, over excessively strong espresso, I talked about my novel, The Chronos Drift, a complex story about a civilization trapped in a recursive time loop that only one person can break. I hadn't spoken about the plot to anyone outside of my own head in years. Alara listened with an intensity that made me feel like the most fascinating person in the room. She offered insightful questions, observations about temporal mechanics, and even a suggestion about the antagonist's motivation that made me grab a napkin to sketch out a new chapter structure. It was intoxicating. It was everything my marriage hadn't been: engagement, passion, shared intellectual curiosity. "Wow, Mark," she said finally, leaning back, a smudge of espresso foam on her lip that I fought the urge to wipe away. "You're brilliant. I really think you're going to finish this." "Thanks to you," I admitted, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. I needed that spark. "Sarah, well, we just stopped seeing things the same way." Alara nodded slowly, her striking eyes turning serious again. "I understand that feeling completely. Being stuck in a life that isn't yours is suffocating." "You're married too?" I asked, my hopeful bubble deflating slightly. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, not anymore. Long story. Let's just say destiny decided my path needed redirection recently, too. She paused, glancing pointedly at her watch. I should probably go, but I'd hate to lose this momentum. Can I have your number? I'd love to hear how the next chapter goes. I readily gave it to her, feeling a thrilling sense of possibility. We stood outside the coffee shop, the afternoon sun casting long shadows. It was really nice meeting you, Alara, I said, trying to sound casual. You too, Mark. She walked back to her car, slipping into the driver's seat. As she started the ignition, she turned slightly toward me one last time. Oh, one more thing, Mark. About that lighthouse sticker. It's actually an inside joke. My ex-husband hated it. Said it reminded him of that awful cruise we took to Maine for our 10th anniversary. My breath hitched. 10th anniversary? Sarah and I had been on a cruise for our 10th anniversary. We had chosen that ridiculous, unique lighthouse decal together, a private joke symbolizing our shared, slightly nerdy appreciation for maritime history. Wait, I managed, taking an involuntary step toward the car window. What was your ex-husband's name? Alara's radiant smile dissolved instantly. Her eyes widened in genuine shock, a look of pure, unadulterated horror washing over her features. She didn't answer. Instead, her foot slammed down on the accelerator. The tires squealed violently against the pavement as the silver sedan shot forward, not back into the flow of traffic, but directly toward a massive, overflowing dumpster, positioned just beyond the end of the parking lot. I watched, frozen, as she steered deliberately, aiming the car with impossible precision. The crunch of metal against industrial refuse was sickeningly loud, followed by the sound of shattering glass and then silence. I sprinted toward the wreck, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, reaching the driver's side just as the airbag deflated slowly, revealing Alara slumped over the steering wheel, unnaturally still. I yanked the mangled door open, ready to pull her out, and that's when I saw the faint, nearly invisible outline of a man's wrist watch strapped tightly to her left wrist. The exact, vintage, heavy gold watch that Sarah had insisted I leave behind when we divided our belongings, claiming it was too masculine for her new apartment. The gold watch glinted dully beneath the shattered crystal face. It wasn't just a watch, it was my watch. The one Sarah had gifted me on our 15th anniversary. The one she'd claimed she couldn't bear to look at anymore. The one I'd foolishly assumed she'd kept or sold off randomly. Seeing it strapped to the wrist of a woman who claimed to have a completely separate history, a woman whose ex-husband shared a bizarre, niche inside joke with my ex-wife, sent a spike of adrenaline so sharp it made my vision swim. "Alara, can you hear me?" I shouted, fumbling for my phone to dial emergency services, but my fingers were slick with sweat. She didn't stir. Her face, which moments ago had been alight with engaging charm, was now slack, pale against the deployment residue of the airbag. I carefully pulled at the seatbelt, the mechanism stiff from the impact, finally managing to release the latch. As I shifted her weight to drag her clear of the wreckage, something hard pressed against my ribs. It wasn't a seatbelt buckle or the crumpled frame of the car. It was a small, leather-bound object tucked deep into the breast pocket of her linen shirt, positioned exactly where a passenger might keep a wallet or keys. My hands, despite their trembling, were driven by a cold, focused curiosity now. This wasn't a bizarre coincidence. This was an intersection of two perfectly tailored deceptions. I carefully extracted the object. It was a small, worn journal. I flipped it open to the first page, the paper smelling faintly of the same jasmine scent I'd noticed in the car. The handwriting was elegant, looping, and instantly familiar. It was Sarah's handwriting. The first entry wasn't dated, but the content hit me like a physical blow. He thinks I don't know about the merger documents he hid in the safe deposit box. He thinks the last 20 years were a slow fade. He is so predictable. Mark believes happiness is an external destination, a new person, a different view. He will leave, and I will let him believe he is choosing freedom. He needs to believe that he is the architect of his own downfall because the truth is far less convenient for his fragile ego. I stumbled back from the smoking car, dropping the journal into the dirt. My head was spinning. Sarah hadn't been the complacent victim I'd painted her as. She hadn't just accepted the divorce, she had orchestrated it. But why? And why was she operating under the alias Alara, crashing her car immediately after our introduction? I flipped through the journal frantically, looking for more context, more proof. A few pages later, the entries became more manic, detailing an obsession not with revenge, but with timing. The loop must be broken externally. He is supposed to meet the variable, the catalyst, today. He has to believe he's found the antidote to our stagnation. Only then will the conditions be ripe for the actual harvest. The script requires his enthusiastic participation in the illusion of choice. Harvest? What in God's name was she talking about? I looked back at the driver's seat. Alara, Sarah, was still unconscious. I checked her pulse reflexively, weak but present. I had to get her out of the car before it caught fire, but the sight of the journal was anchoring me to the spot. Then, beneath the frenzied scribbling near the back cover, I saw a photograph tucked into a slit in the binding. It was old, faded, taken in harsh sunlight. It showed two people standing awkwardly in front of a dilapidated wooden shack on a windswept beach. One person was a much younger Sarah, grinning fiercely. The other person was a man I didn't recognize, tall and angular, looking intensely at Sarah. But it was the background that made the blood drain from my face. Scrawled across the bottom corner of the photo in Sarah's distinctive script were 3 words: the first loop. I looked up from the photo, my eyes darting from the wrecked car to the setting sun reflecting off the skyscraper windows downtown, the building where I had signed away my life just an hour ago. This wasn't about infidelity or boredom, or even a meticulously planned separation. This was something systemic, something planned for years, involving multiple identities and staged accidents. I heard the distant rising wail of sirens. They were coming for Alara. I had seconds. If Sarah had orchestrated the divorce to make me think I was free, and if Alara was a constructed persona meant to lead me to some predetermined catalyst, what happened if I didn't follow the script? What if I called the police and exposed her here now? I grabbed the journal, shoved it inside my briefcase, and backed away from the wreck. I had to get safe, had to read the whole thing before the authorities arrived and confiscated the only evidence I had that my entire life for the past year had been a meticulously crafted lie designed by the woman I thought I knew. I turned and started jogging toward the main road, blending into the gathering evening crowd just as the first police cruiser rounded the corner, its blue and red lights painting the alleyway in flashing chaos. I didn't look back. I sprinted until I reached the relative anonymity of a busy subway entrance, plunging down the stairs into the humid darkness of the platform. As I leaned against a tiled pillar trying to regain my breath, my phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but the dread urged me on. I answered, my voice hoarse. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and undeniably familiar. It was Sarah's real voice, the one she used on important phone calls, devoid of the sadness she wore in the lawyer's office, devoid of the false brightness of Alara. "Mark," the voice said, low and even, "you weren't supposed to leave the scene. You weren't supposed to take that book." A beat of silence hung between us, filled only by the screech of an approaching train. "You just made things significantly more complicated for both of us. Now tell me, what did you read on the first page?" The roar of the incoming subway train drowned out the last word of Sarah's chilling directive, but I didn't need to hear it all. My mind was already racing, playing back the damning entry from the journal, the one about me needing to believe I was the architect of my own downfall. "You're not Sarah," I whispered into the phone, clutching the strap of my briefcase so tightly my knuckles were white. "Who are you?" The voice on the other end chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scratched at my nerves. "Mark, darling, I'm exactly who you divorced. Just upgraded the scenery, and perhaps the supporting cast. You should have stayed where you were. The police aren't looking for me right now. They're looking for a reckless driver involved in a single car accident. The subway car screeched into the station, doors hissing open, flooding the platform with harsh, fluorescent light and a rush of damp, stale air. I saw my reflection in the dark glass of the train window, a panicked, middle-aged man clutching a briefcase like a shield. "You staged that crash," I accused, leaning my forehead against the cool glass. "Why? Why the alias? Why the lighthouse sticker? The watch? That was mine." "Details, Mark, details," she purred, sounding utterly unfazed by the proximity of law enforcement who were likely securing the scene of the accident I just fled. Think of Alara as method acting. She needed to convince you, the newly liberated writer, that fate had delivered you a thrilling, convenient distraction, a beautiful woman who understands temporal mechanics, a perfect stepping stone before you get to the real destination. "What real destination?" I demanded, glancing nervously at the passengers filing onto the train, none of whom seemed to notice the intense, hushed conversation happening beside them. "The one where you finished the novel," she replied, her tone shifting, becoming almost coaching. "You see, Mark, the Chronos Drift isn't just a book you've been writing in your head. It's a set of instructions. I needed you separated, unfettered by mundane responsibilities and motivated by the illusion of a new romantic possibility. Alara was the ignition switch." My stomach twisted. The novel, the one thing I thought was mine, the only thing giving my new life meaning, was actually a shared manuscript, a coded project. "The first loop photo," I stammered, trying to process the betrayal layered on top of the betrayal. "Who was that man with you in Maine?" There was a distinct pause on the line, longer this time, heavy with implication. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped to a chilling whisper, as if sharing a profound secret meant only for my ears. "That, Mark, was the man who was supposed to break the loop the last time you decided you wanted out. He failed. He tried to take the knowledge with him, but I needed a clean slate. I needed a replacement." The train doors beeped, signaling closure. I felt trapped, suspended between stations, both literally and figuratively. "You killed him," I breathed out. It wasn't a question. "Killed is such a harsh word," Sarah countered smoothly. "Let's say destiny rerouted him permanently. He didn't follow the script. You, however, are far more compliant when you think you're being charmed. You're predictable, Mark. That's why you're going to succeed where he failed." The train lurched forward, pulling me rapidly away from the scene of the crash, away from any chance of intervention. My heart hammered against my ribs, not just from fear, but from a terrifying surge of recognition. The climax of the Chronos Drift. The protagonist breaks the time loop by sacrificing his own narrative existence, essentially erasing himself to save the future, was something I'd only conceived of a month ago as a theoretical, dramatic flourish. "You're making me write this," I realized aloud, my voice cracking. "You're making me live the plot." "Precisely. And the ending of the book? The final convergence? That's what we're building toward, Mark. You need to get the manuscript finished, exactly as written in my notes before the next phase begins." "What next phase?" I shouted over the rattle of the tracks. "What happens when I finish it?" The train plunged into a dark tunnel. For a split second, the connection stuttered and static hissed through the line. "When you finish, Mark," Sarah's voice cut through the noise, suddenly crystal clear, sharp as broken glass. "You won't just have written a novel. You'll have created the perfect alibi for my disappearance. Because after you complete the final chapter, I will cease to exist in this reality, just like in your story, and the only person left holding the entire incriminating manuscript will be you." The train burst back into the light of the next station. I looked down at my briefcase containing the journal and the half-finished manuscript of my life's work. The doors opened, and a surge of people pushed onto the platform, momentarily separating me from the possibility of calling the police from a safe location. As I gripped the handle of my briefcase, a sudden sharp pain shot through my left hand. I looked down and saw a small, almost invisible puncture mark blooming red on my skin, right where I'd been steadying the case against the metal pillar in the dark tunnel. It was tiny, almost insignificant, but I felt a strange, sudden wave of disorientation wash over me, like a piece of crucial wiring had just been snipped in my brain. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the platform, the line going dead. I stared at the puncture wound, my vision blurring at the edges, and realized with a cold, sickening certainty that Sarah hadn't needed to crash Alara's car to deliver the final ingredient. She had simply needed proximity. The dizziness intensified, a dizzying sense of temporal dislocation washing over me. It felt like the ground beneath the subway platform was tilting, the fluorescent lights strobing not with the rhythm of the train, but with my own failing perception. The puncture mark on my hand seemed to pulse faintly, a tiny, malevolent beacon. She hadn't needed a crash to remove Alara. She'd needed proximity to deliver whatever poison or bioagent was now coursing through my system. I looked around the crowded platform, suddenly seeing the faces of the commuters not as fellow travelers, but as potential accomplices, background players in Sarah's elaborate, deadly script. Had they seen the phone drop? Did any of them notice the strange bloom of red on my hand? No one met my eyes. They were all wrapped up in their own small narratives. I snatched the phone up, my fingers clumsy, and somehow managed to punch in the digits for the emergency services. 911, what is your emergency? A calm voice asked. I need help, I managed, my voice thick and slurred, the words tasting metallic. My ex-wife. She tried to kill me. It's about a novel, The Chronos Drift. She staged an accident, but she poisoned me. I have evidence. In my briefcase. The journal. You have to look for a silver sedan near the old warehouse district on 14th Street. I rattled off the details. The journal entry. The lighthouse symbol, the identity swap, every fragmented, terrifying piece of the puzzle pouring out of me in a desperate rush before the encroaching fog consumed my thoughts completely. Sir, I'm tracing your call now, the operator responded, her tone shifting to concerned professional urgency. Stay on the line. We have units moving toward 14th Street. Can you describe your current location for me? Subway, platform, green line, heading north. I gasped, leaning heavily against the tiled wall. The air felt suddenly too thick to breathe. My focus narrowed down to the briefcase at my feet, the journal, the proof. If I could just hold on to that, maybe someone would believe me. As the operator kept talking, calming, reassuring, mapping my descent, I tried to pry open the briefcase one last time. I needed to reread that final sentence Sarah had dictated to Alara, the part about erasing herself. Maybe, just maybe, the ending of the book was the key to stopping the real-world consequences. But as my fingers brushed the cold leather, I realized the briefcase felt lighter than it should. I fumbled with the latches, popping them open. The manuscript paper was there, stacked neatly, the familiar weight of the bound pages. But the worn, leather-bound journal, the undeniable proof of her conspiracy, the one I'd clutched mere minutes ago, was gone. My blood turned to ice. She hadn't just been whispering to me over the phone. She had been here. The operator's voice crackled. Sir, Mr. Henderson, we are close. Can you confirm your identity one last time? I looked up. Standing at the entrance to the platform, silhouetted against the harsh exit lights, was Sarah. She wasn't wearing the grim determination of the lawyer's office, nor the flirtatious energy of Alara. She was dressed simply, in dark clothes, looking perfectly healthy, perfectly calm. And she was holding my journal, flipping through it with an air of casual perusal. She raised her hand in a small, elegant wave toward me, a gesture of final farewell. No time, Mark, she mouthed silently across the crowded platform, her eyes locking onto mine with cold triumph. Then she turned and ascended the stairs, melting back into the indifferent city traffic, leaving me alone with the police sirens that were now audible, echoing down the tunnel. My body went numb, the strange toxin overwhelming my central nervous system. The last thing I saw before my vision tunneled completely black was the manuscript in my open briefcase, the fictional narrative that had just become my legal epitaph. When the paramedics reached me moments later, guided by the operator, they found Mark Henderson, the newly divorced fulfillment consultant, unconscious on a subway platform, clutching a partially completed, highly eccentric science fiction novel, with no trace of a silver sedan, a second woman, or any incriminating evidence to support his wild claims of espionage and forced narrative creation. The police secured the manuscript as the only tangible evidence of a possible mental breakdown. Sarah Henderson, the quiet ex-wife, gave a tearful, convincing interview about her former husband's recent, stressful foray into creative writing, leading to paranoia and delusions of grandeur, confirming she had just finalized their divorce that afternoon. The novel, The Chronos Drift, was later published posthumously by a small press. Hailed as a masterpiece of nihilistic sci-fi horror, instantly celebrated for its unnervingly prescient vision of a man trapped by predetermined narrative structures. Sarah Henderson, having successfully executed the final convergence of the story, quietly retired to the lake cabin, finally free of the man who thought leaving her would bring him happiness, never realizing that she had orchestrated his entire life and death to serve her own meticulously planned escape.